welcome to everyone who's joining us today. Those of you who are joining us for the first time, a very big welcome. Those of you who have come back from previous webinars, again, thank you very much for joining us and welcome back. These webinars are our way of sharing information with our community, information and knowledge that we've gained from working with our clients over many years, and trying to tap into what we hear are some of the current issues in terms of managing people in the workplace. So this is a very popular topic, this one about giving and receiving feedback. So we're really excited today to present this to you. So I'm Warren Howard, and welcome to Lauren Ayres.
Hello, everybody.
Sunny Queensland. Welcome, Lauren. How's the weather up your way today?
Not sunny and it's winter. It's about 20 degrees, Warren.
Winter. I think we got 20 degrees down here in Melbourne.
Right.
Was our maximum, but we start the mornings around 7. When I got up this morning, it was an early start. It was 7 and then got up to 11 fairly quickly.
Wow. Okay. So maybe not that level of winter, but
not that level, but rather be where you are, Lauren.
It's cool for now. Yeah, it's the coolest I've felt it all year, funnily enough, today.
Right.
So
are people wearing Ugg boots yet?
Yes, but that's pretty standard. So there's a lot of it's beef week up my way
it is
at
indeed.
the moment.
Yes.
So there's a lot of cowboy boots around town.
Fantastic. So beef week up in Rockhampton.
Yeah.
Okay, and in the background we have Bettina. Hi to Bettina. Bettina's looking after the technical side of our presentation today. So you've got 3 of us on board, and we do sincerely welcome you to our webinar, Thriving Through Feedback Strategies for Dynamic Workplaces. So a little bit about us. We are Howardco. We're a full-service HR consultancy with a business focus. Our purpose is helping visionary leaders build great businesses with a culture where people thrive. And our mission is releasing human potential at every stage of the growth cycle. And we do that through what we call our 3 keystone services: recruitment and onboarding, people management and culture, and leadership and team development. And our points of difference, what makes us unique, or what we like to think makes us unique, is number 1, our business focus. Now, while we firmly believe that people are your greatest asset, no question about that, we also know and believe that it is the business that provides the opportunities for people to thrive. And so that leads us to our strategic partnership approach. And that is, we work with our clients very closely to firstly understand your culture, how you go about things, and secondly, your vision, so that we can work together with both the people and the strategy to ensure that you achieve your vision. And as trusted people advisors, we've been providing a reliable, timely, and trusted advice to our clients for over 14 years now. And we really value those relationships and the fact that people do keep coming back to us for the support we provide. So all in all, we are about creating a world where both people and businesses thrive. Is that true, Lauren?
100%. Yeah, we've had some really good examples of that this week too.
We have indeed. So I wanted to start with a story about feedback before we launch into our content today. I'm sure many of you will probably relate to this story. It goes back a number of years when I was a younger manager, and I had one of my colleagues come up to me with some negative feedback about one of my team members. So when I asked for a bit more information, what they said, look, this team member, when they're in meetings, they're always very abrupt and they tend to talk people down, which gets people offside. They're not listening, and they're certainly not getting the points of view from some of the stakeholders. So, this is having a negative impact on other people. And I thought, wow, okay, this is not good news. And I said, well, hang on, the person you're talking about, is this the same person who you recommended join my team? And they said, oh, yeah, that one. I said, oh, okay. Have they always been like this? And they said, oh, yeah. No, they were always like this. So I thought to myself, great, I've been handed their problem and now I have to deal with it. So it was just, a learning opportunity for me. And you can imagine when I gave the feedback to this person about their behavior during these meetings in particular, you can imagine what they said. They said, why haven't I been told this before? And I had nowhere to go with that, because that was my question too. So what that made me determined to do was actually find a better way for giving and receiving feedback. So that's my motivation. And that's what motivated us to run this webinar today about finding better ways to give and receive feedback. So here's our agenda. We'll talk about why people avoid giving or receiving feedback for that matter and what impact that has on the business. And then how to adopt effective feedback giving strategies. So we're going to give you some tools and some techniques and frameworks. And then also how to accept feedback gracefully. You know, this is the other side, to actually ask for feedback and then accept it in a positive way. And throughout all that, we'll uncover some insights and tools that allow you to customize your feedback for maximum impact. We'll have a Q&A session at the very end of today's webinar, and we'll be going for 45 minutes. We'll finish at 12:45. And finally, hang around to the end. Right, Lauren, were you going to add this?
No, sorry, I was just going to talk. Sorry, he jumped in there. Just about the Q&A, because I mentioned it, but there's a few more people have joined now. If you've got any questions throughout, please use the Q&A chat box as well, and we can make sure we get those covered.
Terrific. Thank you for adding that, Lauren. And finally, hang around to the end because we will give you information about a valuable and really unique checklist that you can use effectively in giving and receiving feedback to your team. So we know you're going to like it, so hang around for that one. So while you're listening to this webinar today and sitting back and taking it all in, I would like you to think about three things. Number one is, what is your attitude towards feedback? And by that, I mean, what's your experience with feedback in the past, both giving it and receiving that? And how has that shaped the way you approach feedback now? Second thing I'd like you to ponder is, how do you incorporate feedback into your daily work? Is it something that you regularly ask for or give? Or is it something that you only do occasionally or perhaps not even at all? And then finally, big question, how can you promote a culture of feedback amongst your team? So I'd like you to be thinking about those three things, and hopefully we'll give you the answers to them as we go through this webinar today. So the first thing is, feedback is everywhere. It's almost like a naturally occurring phenomenon, isn't it? When you think about it, when you go out for a drive, you rely on your GPS to help you navigate to get to where you're going. I mean, we're so dependent on that remote service these days. But we also look at the fuel gauge, don't we, to make sure we've got enough fuel or electricity in some cars to get us there. And in our everyday life, you know, we're also using feedback. So we might wake up in the morning, just like I did this morning. First thing I did was looked at my phone to check what the weather was going to be like and what I needed to wear because I was going out to the CBD. So we're looking for that feedback in our everyday life. And then when you think about our work scenarios, again, feedback is everywhere, either through performance reviews, those water cooler chats you might have, one-to-one meetings, training, even coaching that you might receive is all about feedback. So feedback is everywhere. In fact, it's how we navigate through life, isn't it? So why is feedback important? Well, essentially, it promotes growth. It allows us to reflect and identify the things that we do well, our strengths, and also the things that we can improve on to get better at. And then it helps us navigate our way through those improvements and building on our strengths to actually work towards the goals that we've set for ourselves at work. And finally, if we're not quite on track, we rely on feedback to help us get back on track and actually do the things we need to do to achieve our goals and our ambitions as well. So when you look at feedback, it's such an essential area of growth. In fact, one organization renamed their feedback as developmental feedback. In other words, it's how we develop and grow around here. So I thought I'd use this analogy. This might predate many of you, but back in 1969, when the Apollo 11 mission landed on the moon, it was very interesting. And rumor has it that this mission was off course 97% of the time. And that might be a bit alarming, but what kept it on track was mission control. Those people who were watching the trajectory and advising the astronauts on board and their engine navigation system and management system to keep that spaceship on track so they could safely land on the moon and then successfully return to Earth. So I wanted to use that analogy, if you like, and then draw a parallel back to our workplaces these days, because things move pretty fast now. You know, we are in very dynamic environments, and dynamic environments require different approaches. And I think the same goes for feedback. We need more dynamic feedback for dynamic environments. And if you think about this Apollo 11 space mission, traveling at something like 40,000 kilometers an hour, if it's even 1 degree off track, it's going to be well off course by the time it gets close to its destination. So thinking about the way we give and receive feedback, we need to think about how can we do that more frequently so the people who we are working with are under our control aren't going off track and therefore not going to be able to reach the goals and the targets that we've set, given the way things move so fastly. So dynamic work environments need a more dynamic approach to feedback. So what do we mean by feedback? Well, simply it's information, and it's information that helps us know how well we're doing and how we can do better. Again, use that reference to developmental feedback. I want to talk about just briefly the feedback as a continuous loop. Now, you might think about feedback as something that's two-way, okay? So I give feedback, I receive feedback. But there's a third element that I wanted to draw your attention to here that I think quite often gets overlooked, but it's such an essential element of making feedback work and be effective. Think of this diagram here. So evaluation means we identify a need to improve something, right? So it might be an area of work that we want someone to do better. And in discussion, we come up with an improvement plan or something which will allow that person to improve on that area that we've identified. And so they go away and do it. The third area, which I think is the one that's quite often missed, but is the essential part of the feedback loop, is what I'll call here reinforcement. So I thought I'd use perhaps a story, a sporting analogy to explain what I mean. So just imagine you decided one day, I need to get fitter. I want to get prepared for summer and I need to do something to address my fitness level. So you think of something simple and you say, right, you know what? Every day I'm going to go for a walk and I'm going to walk 100 steps more every day. And so you set your Apple Watch or your Fitbit to do that and you embark on that. And a week later, you've done it 7 days in a row. And you're thinking, well, how good am I? I've been out walking 7 days. How am I feeling? Yeah, a lot better. And then you think, well, I wonder if I need to keep doing it every day. Like it's getting darker in the mornings. It's it's getting colder, certainly. So maybe I'll skip a day and, who's going to know anyway? And then coincidentally, your neighbor or someone close says, hey, I notice you've been out walking every day. Good on you. I notice you're looking a lot fitter. So how do you feel? We think, hey, it's working. Right. I'm not going to skip that day tomorrow. In fact, I'm not going to do 100 steps. I'm going to do 150. So that reinforcement or that follow-up is so essential to maintaining motivation. And yet so often it's forgotten about when we're talking about implementing feedback. So it's a reminder that follow-up, that recognition and that reinforcement you give to the people who are working with you is so important to them continuing to improve. So look, there's so many forms of feedback, aren't there? There's constructive feedback, which is sometimes called negative feedback, but it's where we've identified an area or a need to improve. There's positive feedback, which is about recognizing achievements and building on strengths. And then there's that formal feedback through performance reviews, whether they're 6 monthly or 12 monthly. And then the informal feedback that often takes place at the desk, around the water cooler, maybe even out for a walk. Coaching has a really important role to play in feedback, and quite often in coaching, there'll be scenarios where you're exchanging feedback backwards and forwards. Peer and upward feedback. Peer is lateral, where you're giving feedback to each other. Upward feedback, giving feedback to your boss. And finally, customer feedback and all those other forms of external feedback that come your way all mean there's a lot of feedback available. And the question is, how can we make it all really effective so it has traction? So as Patrick Lencioni has said here, direct and personal feedback really is the simplest and the most effective way of motivation. And it is so important to both personal and organizational growth. And if you haven't read any of Patrick Lencioni's books, I do recommend it, especially the one on the screen there, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
He's one of the best authors out there, isn't he?
Fantastic. And he's a prolific writer. And we use his programs. We do run a workshop on the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And it's based on DISC. It's called, in fact, The 5 Behaviors of a Cohesive Team. So what difference and benefit is feedback to the organization? Well, it's very important for business, as these statistics show. So people who receive feedback from their manager are 69% more likely to do better work. And organizations that encourage a feedback culture have higher levels of engagement and are 21% more profitable. So not only does it just make sense, but it actually makes good business sense that we have feedback as an important element of our culture. So
that poses the question.
Barriers, Lauren.
Yeah.
Over to you.
If it's 69% of your employees would do better work with feedback, it's almost a no-brainer to say we should do it all the time. But obviously we've got some barriers to feedback. Now, obviously there's a lot of reasons to why feedback will be not delivered, but we've just condensed it down to 3 key ones for you today. The first one is a lack of focus. And realistically, this is about not really having a proper process or a mindset of giving feedback, or maybe even making sure that part of your culture in your organization or your team is feedback oriented. And so when we lack focus, we're not prioritizing it. Maybe you might have inconsistent ways of delivering feedback. We were just talking about this as well in an example recently as a team where there's no one, set way of delivering feedback across the business. So some managers are able to develop more than their teams better than other teams because there's no consistent way about doing that. And so it's really important to just recognize that's probably one of the keys, not having a proper process and not having proper focus on that feedback culture. The second one that we've nominated for us today is the fear of the unknown. This is probably the one that's the most common because this is what actually really prevents the conversations from happening in the first place. People may have a concern that the conversation might go in a direction that they're not prepared for. Similar to your story that you shared earlier, Warren, about that needing to give that feedback to that fellow, that left you in a bit of an awkward spot because he's like, well, how come no one's told me about this before? It seems like it was quite constructive in the end. So people don't know what to expect when they're dealing with offering feedback. And then also for some people, there could be a lot of worry. Am I going to upset someone? Am I going to offend someone? Am I going to make the situation worse? Especially when we're talking about that constructive feedback that we need to deliver that might be critiquing something that somebody's done as well. And so that ties in with making sure that you foster a culture of giving feedback so that, and we'll cover that more in a little minute, but it's an important thing. The last one there is the pressure of time. And as you were talking about, Warren, giving the examples, we're talking about these dynamic workplaces where things are happening at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Our day-to-day demands in the workplace mean that we're, very quickly on to the next thing, and we're not necessarily taking the time to think about, are we making sure that we're providing feedback, both constructive feedback as well as positive feedback? And so this can lead, people already in overwhelm, which kind of sort of then self-perpetuates the need to give feedback because people are acting a little bit crazy. So the other thing about the pressure of time is that you might miss real-time feedback. So something's happened in the moment, being able to do something constructive with that feedback there and then, rather than waiting for, a week, a month, a year down the track as well. So pressure of time being the third barrier. So all that being said, what is it that we can do? If you forward the slide, please, Warren. We're looking at some strategies for delivering feedback effectively. Now, we've got 5 strategies for you today, and these all go to helping us understand how do we do this well, given that we've got those barriers to overcome. So the first one that we've got here is admit giving feedback is not easy and does not always come naturally. So for those of you who may very well be familiar with the lady Brené Brown, she did a very famous TED Talk probably about 15 years ago on vulnerability. And this is one of her quotes, that feedback should be as vulnerable for the person giving it as it is for the person receiving it. And vulnerability is at the heart of the feedback process. And so when you're talking about wanting to give feedback to people, one of the things that works really well is if you've established a high level of trust with that person. And if you're able to therefore admit to somebody, let's say, Warren, I wanted to give you feedback and I needed to admit to you that it was a little bit difficult for me to do that. by my actually voicing that and letting Warren know, it actually creates what we call that vulnerability to say, well, look, I'm learning here. This is something uncomfortable for me, or, this is something that I'm not very well practiced in. And that instantly would build trust between Warren and I, therefore making the process of delivering the feedback better. So it's always a good idea to just acknowledge that and then to communicate that with the view that you're building that vulnerability-based trust with your team. The second one that we've got is about delivering specific feedback in bite-sized pieces. So there's two key parts to this. First of all is making sure that when you're delivering feedback, you're being specific about a certain situation, a certain behavior that you've seen, a certain action that's been taken, so that people can actually draw a correlation to the feedback being given to something that they've actually been involved with and done. And so that's about being clear and concise to what we're talking about. The second part of this is in bite-sized pieces. You want to be really careful not to overwhelm people with a laundry list of all of the things that you think that they've done wrong, or even a laundry list of all the things that they've done well, because they end up getting diluted. So make sure as well when you're in those conversations that you're observing, when you're delivering feedback to somebody, that you're observing their responses. If their eyes start to glaze over, you're probably getting to the point where you're offering more than just bite-sized information. So just be very mindful there to just check in and make sure that the feedback's being digested properly. The third one there is about focusing on the behavior, not the personality. If we were all standing in a room here, I'd say hands up, whoever likes being criticized for their personality. And I imagine that the whole room, everybody's hands would go up. People don't like that. So the idea here when we're delivering feedback is make sure that you focus on the behavior or the task or the action that somebody has completed, rather than on anything about that person directly. It never ever goes well, and it starts to get beyond what we would consider constructive feedback, certainly at that point. Our fourth one is to do more asking than telling. This is a great management tip anyway. So if you've got a team of people that you're leading, it's a great skill to develop. It's also critical when we're talking about giving feedback here. So I always like to wrap this around this idea of be curious. Make sure that you want, if you, especially if you're giving constructive feedback to somebody, maybe make sure that you don't have assumptions about what took place, and you have, with this curiosity, you have a focus then of understanding what actually happened, understand what happened for the person, and allow them to tell their story and their process and their way of thinking that they went about doing things. If you aim to understand better, you're going to get better outcome for the person, because they're going to also have an opportunity to really think about themselves and reflect on their feedback that's been given a little bit better. Our last one is, and last but not least, is about providing positive recognition where it's due. And I had a really interesting story this morning. I was walking along the beach with my friend and her dog, and, quite often the dog would go off and do something that she didn't want the dog to do, and she'd call the dog back. And every time she called the dog back, she said, good girl, Maisie, and really reinforced the positive behavior of the dog coming back to her. And I was thinking about it. We do this with children too. When they do something well, we reinforce the positive behavior. And I thought, it does happen in the workplace, but maybe it's not happening anywhere near as much in the workplace than it needs to be. And I think because Warren, you were saying that dynamic workplace, we're just like moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour that we just sort of stop and don't forget that. So do make sure that you're delivering positive recognition where it's due. We'll cover it off in a little bit, but just be mindful that people also need different levels of that positive reinforcement or that positive recognition, but it's really, helpful to know. And so how do we summarize this? Just a quick model that's very famous out there. So you can do some Google searches and find, but if you need to give feedback to somebody, this is the model to follow. It's called situation, behavior, impact. And it's as simple as be really specific about the situation. Say, for example, you've seen one of your employees working back late, really quite late, to work on a presentation for a client presentation, for example. You observe the behavior, say, hey, I noticed that you stayed back really late to get that presentation done on Tuesday night. Again, make sure you're specific and clear about what you've observed. And then the impact is, letting them know what's happened. Hey, we had this client get back to us. They were really impressed with the presentation. And, I'm so grateful for the work that you did to help make that happen, because this client's now going to start doing work with us. And so you explain the impact of what their behavior, what their actions have done that's actually benefiting the business. So that's a really great model that you can follow there. Great. Thanks, Warren.
Thank you, Lauren. Back to me. So we talked about how to give feedback effectively. So I want to talk about now how to receive feedback positively. And I just want to start with a very short, brief case study here. Now, it's about Microsoft. I'm sure everyone's aware of Microsoft, the organization, but they did some analysis of their performance management system, and the feedback that they got about that people just did not like it. They weren't happy with the way feedback was given during performance management. They didn't like the style. They didn't like the frequency of it. In fact, there wasn't much they liked about it at all, to be honest. So they embarked on an exercise to find out how they might be able to do it better. And they actually came up with something I thought was very revealing. And that was the basis of why people didn't like feedback. And it was that they felt that something that they had no control over. In other words, they didn't know what was coming, and they had no control over how it was going to be delivered to them. So that lack of control created a lot of negativity around the way people perceive the feedback process. So what did they do? Well, I thought they did something very clever. They flipped it around. And so instead of talking about giving feedback, they reoriented that and reframed it to say, we're going to focus on asking for feedback, because you have more control over that. Okay? It's up to you whether you ask for feedback and when you ask for feedback. But if you do it, then it's going to create a situation where you have far more influence over when you're ready for it and so on. They set up educating people around how to ask for feedback and then how to receive it positively. So I thought that was a really unique case study and something's worth thinking about, that maybe if we get better at asking for feedback, we might also get better at giving it. So how do we receive feedback positively? Well, this one might be self-evident, but it's another communication skill that quite often is overlooked or perhaps not well done. And that's actively listening and seeking clarification. Now, one of the things that happens when, just imagine if I say to you, hey, do you mind if I give you some feedback? How do you feel? All right. So instantly your mind goes into, and this is what happens, the psychology of the situation is that this triggers off a reaction, because it's feedback is in this situation treated something like a threat or a shock. And so your brain goes into that, fight or flight mode, and we can become defensive. And guess what happens when you become defensive? What happens to your ears? They turn off. So a really good reminder here when we are being given feedback is to really pay attention and to try and park some of those natural responses that we might have when we're told, I'm going to give you some feedback. And then seeking clarification is, if it doesn't quite make sense or you're not quite getting it, then this is your opportunity to just ask, and not in a, what do you mean by that sort of way, but in a way, can you please explain that? I'm not quite understanding what you're trying to tell me. And if you do that, that's going to encourage the other person to open up and give you perhaps an example that could help you understand. That's number one. And it leads in naturally to this. It's about keeping your emotions in check and focusing on the message. Remember, there's a message here, and someone is giving you the gift of feedback. So we need to identify, well, what is it that they're trying to tell me here? And can I turn off those negative voices, those fight or flight or even defensive notions that I might have going on, and put those to one side and really think about, okay, what information am I being given here and how can I understand it better? Look for patterns. Now, it's quite possible that the feedback you receive might not be the first time you've heard this. Only in the past you've chosen to ignore it or thought, well, that's only one person's point of view. But when you start to hear things a number of times, it is cause to reflect and think about, well, maybe there is something in this. Maybe I do need to change something about my behavior or the way I go about things. So getting frequent feedback about similar things, there could be a pattern there, and we have to be aware and take notice of those things. And feedback is a gift, so treat it that way. and thank the person for giving it to you. Now, it might have been uncomfortable and you might not have liked what you heard during that feedback. That happens, doesn't it? Certainly, I know sometimes that has happened to me. But remember, it's been given to you with the idea of helping you grow. So let the person know that. And so next time when they think about giving you some feedback, they'll also do that willingly, knowing that you're going to give them a positive reception. So as this slide said here, this is not a cookie cutter approach. And we alluded earlier that you need to customize the way you give feedback to people because they receive feedback differently. So I'm going to ask Lauren to explain what that means.
Yeah, well, I'm volunteered to chat about this because many of you who know Howardco know that we love to use the DISC profile for being able to understand people, and it's quite commonly known or used in a communication setting, but it's also very valuable insights that when we understand people's DISC styles in terms of how they're best going to be able to receive feedback. So if you just advance that slide there for me, Warren, knowing your people's personality, really can help you thrive in this. And understanding, like I was saying before about the positive feedback, just knowing somebody, likes to have an accolade and they like to have fanfare and celebration, whereas other people might just be quite happy with a pat on the back. And I remember actually a woman who'd retired recently at one of our clients. She'd worked there for 13, 14 years, like one of the longest serving employees, short of the owner of the business. And she didn't want a retirement celebration. She really didn't want any fuss at all made. She just wanted to work her last day and to leave. So it's really important to understand, and it can really be helpful then understanding somebody's personality style as to how they best like feedback. So we've got just a little analogy here, Warren, if you can take me through the next slide, just understanding how the different styles, the D, I, S, and C, how they first of all like to give feedback. What's the best way? So if you had your own natural preference of your way to give feedback, what is it that you would likely do? And again, we're generalizing here, but it's sort of very common themes that we see with these styles. So first of all, with the I style, when they're giving feedback, they tend to gloss over problems and so they gloss over things and they redirect problems to something more positive as well. So they tend to like to keep on the more positive side of things and not get into the weeds about what's actually happened. With the S style there, they really do avoid hurting people's feelings at all costs, and so therefore they can sometimes downplay the severity. If it particularly we're talking about constructive feedback, they can really downplay that and not really get to the nuts and bolts of the issue. With that, when we've got the D style, D's are very well known for being direct and matter of fact. Now, when they're giving feedback, they can also be that when they're delivering sensitive feedback as well. So sometimes they can sort of miss some cues around the sensitivity of things and being observant, because it's very much about, what's happened, we've got to get it fixed, let's move on. And that moving on piece is also where they can rush and not really wait for time for that feedback to be digested and processed as well. So because they're ready to move on to the next thing. Lastly, with the C style, they tend to be objective and factual about feedback. And this can sometimes come across as being a bit cold as well, because it's very much about the detail, the nuts and bolts, what's happened. And they have a tendency to avoid emotion too. So if they need to give feedback to someone that they know is more emotional, they may, just avoid giving the feedback altogether. So it's very interesting. That's how they like to give feedback, if that's their preference and their style. But on the flip side of that is, well, if we needed to say to them, you need to deliver feedback to each of the styles, how would that look? So on the next slide there, Warren, for me, this is how to deliver feedback to each style. So if you know somebody's DISC style, this is going to be a great tip for you. So first of all, with the I styles, I've got I in my profile. Acknowledgement is key. We do like to have acknowledgement, but that's a bit of the fanfare. They're very optimistic as well. So when you're delivering feedback, keep it on the positive side. However, make sure that you underscore the importance or the seriousness of the feedback if it is constructive feedback as well. So don't gloss over that, keep it positive, but do make sure that you stress, this is the feedback that we're talking about. The S styles, when you're delivering feedback to them, and again, as we'll talk about, this is all generalizations based on styles, and there'll be individuals that will be unique within this, depending on their level of emotional intelligence. The S really needs reassurance, because if you give them feedback, they could very well take it personally. They may become really hard on themselves. So you want to make sure that it's not that you're not upset with them, and you really want to reassure that with them. I'm not upset with you. I've just observed this situation. We've got to think about it in the ways, and how can I help you? So being supportive to help get somebody through a bit of feedback there. The D style, yes, they like direct and firm feedback 100%. There's also, though, an element of that they don't want to lose control. That's their fear. The D style's fear is loss of control. So you want to make sure that you're not controlling when you're giving feedback to them. Focus on the results. So focus on the results of what they did, and then what are the results that we need to focus on going forward. That's the primary driver for a D style, is their results. And lastly, there with the C style, they do prefer logical and objective feedback. So they don't need fluff or anything like that. Give specific examples of the things that they've done. So there's some really short, simple tips of how you can deliver feedback, just even based on somebody's DISC style. And if you started with that, that's going to get you a long way. Obviously, there's going to be nuance with every individual, but it's a really good starting point, Warren.
Thank you, Lauren, very much. And as Lauren said, we work with our clients in many different industries at many different levels. One of the common threads across all of our clients predominantly is that they all use DISC as a means of improving communication, teamwork, and collaboration amongst their teams. And here's one of our long-standing clients here, Michael Gross from Parenting Ideas, talking about how DISC profiles have worked really well for them, and a workshop that we ran for them, which he said was a ripper. So thank you, Michael, very much for that. But we put that in there just to demonstrate, by way of an example, that DISC is not just a book to read and put on the shelf. It is it becomes a working model that you can use in so many different ways of communication. Today we've been talking about feedback, but it is also a very, very strong element in anything such as handling conflict, leadership, management, and so on. So we're big advocates of it, and we're not ashamed of blowing our trumpet on this one.
No.
Thank you. So let's summarize. Today has been all about empowering feedback in a dynamic work environment. And you might remember the 3 questions I asked you earlier, which was, what's your attitude towards feedback? How do you incorporate feedback into your daily work? And then how do you build a culture of feedback amongst your team? I wanted to round off the story too, by the way, that I told you earlier about the person who I had to give feedback to that came as a shock as to what happened to them. Well, they actually left the organization. So they left after that. So you would think, oh, okay, well, that was a bad outcome. Well, in fact, about 3 months later, that person came back to the office and had a meeting with me. And they said to me, really want to thank you for giving me the feedback that you did in the way that you did. I really appreciated that. It really did make me think about, how I want to be seen and perceived and how I want to work. I felt like I needed to go into a new environment, and I just wanted to tell you that I'm doing really well, and I've just been promoted to a manager position.
Nice.
So, as much as it was hard for me and it felt very uncomfortable, and I'd still remember that day, I'm really glad to know that there was a positive outcome. So how do we do this? Well, I think the first step is, create a feedback culture. Start small, but work on the positives. Think about ways in which you can incorporate feedback into the little things that you do every day. And also ensure a psychological safe workplace to do that. And by that, I mean, make sure people feel that they can talk about their feedback and not be judged, or not feel that this is something that is not welcome, but to create a situation where just feedback becomes business as usual. And it starts with you, okay? It starts with the leader. So maybe we can take an example from Microsoft, maybe start asking for feedback and see how it goes as an example to your people and get them to do the same. And by doing that, then start working on giving feedback as well. This is a really important reminder, and really just summarizes what Lauren's been telling you, that while we don't want to make feedback personal, what we do need to do is make sure that it is personalized. We need to personalize our feedback to the style of the person so that they receive it in the best way. And then finally, remember that feedback loop. It is a continuous process. And that third step, the reinforcement, the recognition, the acknowledgement, is so critical to maintaining the motivation and the continuous improvement that we're all seeking. So that's what we've covered today. We've covered a lot of ground, but I do hope it's been useful for you. We have a few minutes to pause for any questions. Maybe we can take one or two quickly if there are any that have come through, either Lauren or Bettina.
Yeah, I've got one here, and someone's asking about if we can, like when we've got to give constructive feedback, how do we ensure that that feedback is received like constructively and doesn't like demotivate people? Because yeah, that I imagine a lot of people have that as a block.
Yeah, and I think that is one of those limiting beliefs, isn't it? That if we've got to give some hard or constructive or even negative feedback, that we're going to demotivate that person and we're not really sure about how they'll react. So maybe we just won't do it at all and hope they'll figure it out for themselves. So look, I think one of the answers to that is just how you position the conversation, and both physically and interpersonally. So physically, it would be, make sure it's in a non-threatening environment. Maybe, choose an app to go for a walk, something like that, something where the person will feel more relaxed about it, something when obviously where no other people are watching. And then secondly, at that interpersonal level, explain up front as to why you're giving this feedback. What's your intention, and put the positive spin on that. That we treat feedback as a growth and a learning tool here. So I want to give you some feedback that I hope will help you develop and grow and achieve your full potential. So I'm all for trying to put the positive spin on it up front, so this person is not going to feel threatened by the feedback you're about to give. That'd be my advice. Lauren, what would you add?
Yeah, no, I mean, similar, to be honest. I was just thinking, my mind went straight back to that vulnerability-based trust piece as well. And I think it really does make a massive difference to have that. But I also am mindful too, like you gave that great story about that fellow, I mean, initially him leaving the organization, I mean, that would have been like okay, well, this is how I'm perceived, that he could have been demotivated by that. But I think people, if they're really genuinely focused on their own growth, will come around to that going, you know what, that was the right thing. I'm going to go and let Warren know that. So
look, it is 12:45, and I'm conscious of the fact that we probably have to close off here. Is there a quick question there, Lauren?
There's a couple of quick questions. Yeah. So one of the participants says they work with remote teams. How does that impact how we provide feedback if we can't see them in person, which is a really good one.
That's such a good one, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge we face every day now, where we've got people working in hybrid environments. So that is a jolly good question. My view is try and make time to do that, whether that's on Zoom or Teams or any other video-based communication that you have there, or even on FaceTime on your phone. But certainly try and make it face-to-face and make a time to do it. With my own team, we book in a fortnightly catch-up, one-to-one. And because all the team works remotely, and we do that. And I always start those meetings, Lauren will know this, and I ask, what's on your mind, to just try and get some insight into what's going on with them. So working remotely, yes, it does throw another challenge there, but it just means we have to be more conscious of making time to do that.
I would just add to that too, really briefly, is about making sure that the environment, because when we're on our computers, there's other distractions and things like that as well. So establishing, some parameters even for team meetings, that we turn off notifications or things like that, because there's nothing worse than trying to deliver feedback in a situation when someone's really only half in the meeting as well. So that's something to be very mindful of. Just a comment here from our lovely friend Sue, who's enjoyed the webinar today, and she said that she loves the steps and that she'd like to use them with her coaching clients, because coaching's like continuous feedback, isn't it? And I think absolutely that's why we love to coach as well, because we can really, you feel like you get to really work with the person and really support them through a change process.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, those people who submitted questions. They make us think, and hopefully they were questions that other people perhaps were interested in and had on their mind as well. So very happy to answer those. So in closing, first of all, a big thank you for attending today. If this has piqued your interest, if you'd like to know more about DISC and how it can improve communication, productivity, and performance in your organization, please get in touch with us. There's my details and Lauren's details there as well. We'll be more than happy to talk to you in more detail. The other thing I promised to come back to today was our giving feedback checklist, and you'll see that on the left-hand side of your screen. We will be sending that to you. Now, this is unique. This is something that we have crafted and developed based on our webinar today. It's a really practical tool. I'm really looking forward to sending it out and getting feedback on your use of it, because not only does it give you some structures and frameworks to use when you are approaching some feedback, but it also gives you a summary of those different personality types and how you can approach them to make that feedback more effective. So really valuable tool. I really would like you to use it and give us some feedback about how it works for you. So in saying that, I do appreciate everyone joining us today and hanging around for the extra minutes or so. And it is a very, very good afternoon from me, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. And I'll hand over to Lauren to close off.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Really great to see you. Yeah, please spread the word. Thank you.
Bye for now.